Vasudevaya. Haribol. So, had request for further explanation or go a little bit further with last week's topic, and got an assortment of different communications. So we'll try to deal with it a little bit further. But as I mentioned, it's like a really huge topic and cannot adequately be dealt with in such a short period of time. So one of the things we hopefully established, or it was understood, that there is a spiritual reality and there is a material reality. The reason that the body manifests symptoms of life and personhood is because of the presence of a spiritual being residing within it. Death is when that spiritual being can no longer, for a variety of reasons, inhabit that outer covering and leaves generally by force. And then the true nature of the body becomes manifest. Not very attractive, not very desirable. If we are going to try and enter the reality, the spiritual reality, with only the blunt instruments of the material energy, the body and the mind, it's not going to do it. It can't do it. It's not made for that. It's not purpose-built for that. We mentioned how when we look at the biggest unit that's within our grasp, so to speak, being the universe, and how we cannot possibly comprehend the actual size, scope, and content, and all of the laws governing the material universe in which we reside. Or if you want to use galaxies or whatever, there's a lot, just as far as you can go. And the smallest complete unit, although that may be debatable, the smallest complete unit being an atom, and considering a hydrogen atom, we cannot comprehend how that is actually functioning, the nature of those forces, and the size. How can you comprehend the size? They say 10,000 atoms can reside on the period at the end of a sentence in a book. I mean, can you really take something that small and divide it into 10,000? I mean, in your mind? I mean, physically you can't do it. In your mind, can you do it? And of course the answer is no. And then you're faced with this reality. If there is a higher spiritual truth beyond that which is material, it necessarily exists outside of these things. And we're already having a hard time getting our head around, these two extremes and all the stuff in between. So one needs some humility in approaching the subject. And not everyone is going to accept the idea that there is some higher spiritual truth or a God. They just won't. And it's generally because of a certain enviousness, the idea that there's somebody out there that's kind of like bigger than me, that I'm not the center of everything, that I'm not totally in control of everything, irks some people, particularly people that are classified as being quite intelligent. And so it manifests in a lot of the arguments placed about, this idea of the existence of some higher truth or reality. So part of what I've got here was, I'm going to deal with the last two questions, which were, from last week, which I didn't really address. One is, does God really exist, and how can we know that? And the second one was also, if he does exist, can we know who he or she is, or must he or she remain a mystery? But before dealing with that, a couple of things I looked at. One of them was a question, and this is commonly answered. Why does a benevolent God allow evil or apparent injustice to exist? And this is often used as a reason to dispense with any notion of a higher spiritual reality or God. And then a second one attached to that is, why did a so-called perfect God create flawed beings? And the third one's, why are humans allowed to make wrong choices if there is a God? And of course, they're all sort of interesting, and we could spend the next hour and a half really delving into these issues, but because of being pressed for time, I'll just deal with them really quickly. The idea that's been put forward is that because the world is not perfect, then there can't possibly be a God. And that's just not very smart. Sorry. It's just not. It's not very smart. Why do you think the world is meant to be perfect? This is incredibly egocentric. It's all about me and my desire to make a permanent home in this world and to perfectly enjoy everything and to find perfect love. And if I can't do that, that's God's fault. And that's just what? What makes you think it's meant to be perfect? It just has a nature. The material energy has a nature. And I, as an eternal spiritual being, have a different nature. And when I seek to fulfill my true and deep and eternal spiritual needs in the realm of the material energy, it's just not going to happen, because they're two completely different things. And for you to get upset because of the limitations of material nature is just, it doesn't show much clarity of thinking. It's much more smart to just look at those different natures and go, wow, this is a bit of a mess. I should not be putting all my focus into trying to find perfection in that which is imperfect. I should not be seeking permanence in that which is temporary. So that's about as far as I want to go on that subject. And I think anybody that kind of I'll just touch on this other reality. Yes, you have free will. You can make choices. That means you can also make wrong choices. The living being, the jiva, the Vedas and all of the great yogic texts, they have astonishing depth of knowledge about the nature of things. And they speak about all these different categories of energy, material and spiritual, and their natures. The nature of the living being, the jiva, the individual spiritual, the spirit soul, let's use that term, is that they are described in Sanskrit in this term, Tathastha Shakti. it means, this word tatashta, it means an imaginary line between water and land. I mean, is there any demarcation between water and land? It's not really. If you get down there and look at it, even microscopically especially, or on an atomic level, there's no clear demarcation. But yet there is a substantial difference between a body of water and the land that it abuts. The Jiva Tattva, this energy known as the living beings, has this unfortunate, I'm going to say it's unfortunate if it's misused, but it has this characteristic that when placed in association with the material energy, there is the tendency to become overwhelmed by that, to be so deeply influenced by it that we lose the plot. We begin thinking this body is me. I begin seeking perfection and happiness and fulfillment in the material energy. And that's not where I belong. I am an eternal spiritual being. When I put myself in the proximity of that which is divine, that which is spiritual, then my real eternal nature manifests and I experience that reality. So I can go either way. That is a fundamental reality. And so the fact that I have freedom of choice means I can make good choices and I can make bad choices. Why is that a flaw? That's not a flaw. That's pretty amazing. The fact that I make bad choices doesn't mean that there is something flawed in that truth about who I actually am, that I can be on either side of the fence here. That's just part of the actual divine or spiritual nature of these things. But I'm kind of hesitant to go deeper into that. I'm just giving you a little picture. And if anybody has any questions about that or something you'd like to share with us, then we can explore that in a bit more depth if you would like. I don't want to overwhelm people with things that are too philosophical, but I will tell you this. It is mind-blowing. It is astonishing the depth of teachings connected with this vast body of spiritual knowledge, this system. Not only is there vast amounts of knowledge, there are pathways to acquire that knowledge and to experience an awakening of our true spiritual, the reality of our spiritual existence. So in relation to the last two questions from last week, does God really exist and how can we know that? Well, the reality is in our current state, we can't. You can't know that. If all you are going to use, if your toolbox is your mind and your senses, you are not going to come to know God. There needs to be this awakening of our deeper spiritual essence and who we are. So there is also something that must be acknowledged. We talked about it last week, that it is possible for the living being to exist in different states of consciousness, to be immersed in the material creation, the material existence. I have to be in a certain state of consciousness. And when I am in that state of consciousness, I don't see anything beyond that. If I am going to lift this veil, if I'm going to see with greater insight, there is a need for some transformation or change to my fundamental state of consciousness. So in this quest for spiritual truth, there are two paths. One is called an ascending path and the other one is called a descending path. all spiritual teachings are going to fall into one or the other. The ascending path is incredibly difficult, and it relies entirely upon me and my strength and my will and my abilities. And so we would see this with some of the great, what were called tapasvis, the great performers of austerity, the great yogis who, they endured unimaginable difficulties, tremendous amounts of fasting, sitting in one place and bringing the mind completely into submission after decades of practice. These people that talk about, I'm practicing Kundalini yoga, give me a break. You don't even know what Kundalini yoga is. You don't even understand what is required to actually practice some of these systems. And I'm sorry if I'm being a little harsh. I'm not wanting to offend, but I do want to shine a little light. The people that would engage in these activities, it was mind-blowing. They were just like stellar, incredible personalities. The problem is this, though. Consciousness is inseparable from personality. When I say personality, I don't mean your personality. Your personhood, the fact that you are a person, isn't defined by your body. That all gets left behind. And as soon as you leave, is a dead body a person? I mean, if you knew somebody that was inhabiting that body, and you had a relationship with them and they suddenly left, you would may start to think, well, that is still a person, but it's not. All you've got to do is bump into a dead body that you don't have any connection with. It's pretty gross. It's pretty undesirable. The body does not have a personhood. That personhood is imparted by the living being. The fundamental nature of all consciousness is personality or personhood. In Sanskrit, this is called Purusha. Purusha means literally the person. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, there's so many, explanations about the nature of Purusha. But he states very clearly that amongst all Purushas, or living beings, there is one that is extraordinary and different than all the rest. And he names this Purusha as Ishvara. And I've read some horrible translations of these things where people are attributing, that, you become Ishvara. No, you don't. You're a jiva. You're a jiva tattva, eternally. That doesn't change. But there is this other personality that is really different. In the Mundaka and Svetasvatara Upanishad, the Kata and the Svetasvatara Upanishad, there is a famous verse that's repeated, Nitya Nityanam Chaitana Chaitanam, that amongst all eternals, there is one that is unique and special. Amongst all conscious beings, there is one that is unique and special, and begins to speak about the nature of that connection and relationship. In the Vedic system, if you just try to do everything on your own, by your own efforts, by your own strength, the possibility of reaching a high state of spiritual consciousness is extremely limited and extremely rare. And so what was advised is what's called the descending process, where I adopt in a mood of humility, I approach someone that is actually a spiritually realized personality, and I take guidance and direction on what it is that I need to do for this transformation to happen to me, so I begin to see this spiritual truth. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the 4th chapter, the 34th shloka, it says, just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he has seen the truth. In that prayer that I chant in the very beginning when I offer my respects to my spiritual teachers, it's actually really amazing. It's really far out prayer. Om Ajnana. This offering of respects. And then the first word is Ajnana, which means ignorance. And so this statement in English is, I offer my respectful obeisances unto my spiritual master, who has opened my eyes, and of course it means spiritual eyes, which were blinded by the darkness of ignorance. And he has done this with the torchlight of knowledge. The actual Sanskrit terminology, though, is really astonishing. It talks about two things. In the Ayurveda, from thousands of years ago, they actually practiced certain types of surgery. And they had a specific instrument that was used in removal of cataracts. And it's just like, what? You know, that's amazing. And that tool is referenced here. It's referenced here as a very beautiful metaphor. That it's like my eyes, my vision, my spiritual vision has got a cataract over it. It's now, everything has become cloudy and I cannot see with clarity. But my spiritual master, with this divine tool, was able to remove that cataract and put this salve or ointment, Anjana, this ointment upon the eyes to bring about a healing. So now I can see with great clarity. So it is by this process of approaching spiritual authority. And of course, that's something that you need to do very carefully. You will find there are an infinite number of people that want to pose as spiritual teachers and take you for a ride and use and abuse you in different ways for their own purpose, to feel like I'm some heavy dude, or I'm some great personality or something, and next minute they're giving all kinds of special secret initiations and stuff. And it's just so much garbage going on out there that it's really scary and unbelievable. So one actually needs to be very cautious. But that does not mean the system in its original and pure form is not of enormous value. In this world, if you want to know something, you go to an authority, whether that's in a university or a research lab or whatever. You approach an authority and you submit yourself. I would very much like to learn from you and acquire this knowledge. Could you please teach me? You need to have, if you bowl in, whether it's to a classroom or to a big research scientist or whatever, and start telling them what you think and how they should teach you, you're not going to last very long. Some humility is required. This system is exactly the same in the spiritual realm. That if one wants to acquire not only knowledge, but an actual experience of the reality of my spiritual being and any higher spiritual being, one needs to undertake a process so that they are not limiting themselves only to the material energy, the senses and the mind. One needs to go much further than that. Can a person come to know any higher or divine being or God? The answer is yes. It is part of your eternal nature to have this connection. This is why you long for love, why you seek protection and shelter. This is because it is the very nature of the soul itself. And the process of spiritual life is a process of uncovering a spiritual reality that's there, that we've cut ourselves off from with our state of consciousness and absorption and everything that is material. Not only is it possible, every single one of you have the capacity, if you take to an appropriate process, you will have a gradual awakening, an experience of this higher spiritual reality and truth. And I promise you, it is absolutely, ecstatically amazing. There is no experience that you can have in this world that can even be like a drop of water compared to the ocean, in terms of comparing the limitless happiness from reestablishing this connection. It's not like the connection is not there. No, the connection is there eternally. Only we have shut ourselves off. We have turned away. We have clouded ourselves in a certain state of consciousness. And the process of spiritual life is a process of uncovering what is eternally there, your eternal relationship. You need spiritual nutrition. That spiritual nutrition is actually love, spiritual love. We are bound. It is stated in the famous Brahma Samhita that we are bound by a bond of kinship with this Ishvara, this supremely lovable personality. And the real path of spiritual life is awakening the reality of my actual identity and reestablishing, from my point, reestablishing these lost and eternal and ecstatic connections. Okay? Wow. Is this okay or what? I'll just read you a couple of verses that I had pulled. All of them, these three, are from what was called the Bhagavat Purana. And one of them speaks about a mystical ability of great teachers who could take wood and by the chanting of mantra and certain manipulation could make fire manifest from it. And this was usually done when they lit a fire, a sacrificial fire, yajna, it was called. I mean, it's amazing, their concept. When they look at wood, they say fire is residing within the wood. Like when you light something on fire, it's not your match or whatever that's making that fire. That fire has now become released from within the material. Anything that's combustible. So it says, by manipulating a fire-generating stick, great saints and sages can bring forth the fire lying dormant within the wood. In the same way, O Lord, those expert in understanding the absolute truth try to see you in everything, even in their own bodies, and yet you remain concealed. You are not to be understood by indirect processes involving mental or physical activities, because you are self-manifested. Only when you see that a person is wholeheartedly engaged in searching for you, do you reveal yourself, and therefore I offer my respectful obeisance unto you. And then another verse, but although you reside within the heart, you are very far away from those whose minds are disturbed by their entanglement in material work. Indeed, no one can grasp you by his material powers, for you reveal yourself only in the hearts of those who have learned to appreciate your transcendental qualities. You reveal yourself in the hearts of those persons of pure consciousness who constantly hear about you, chant about you, offer you worshipable service and glorify you, and converse with others about you. So that is, in summary, the key to coming to know. If we remain in the materially entangled state, you cannot come to know whether God exists or not. It's not even a possibility. If you want to find out, there is a need to operate in a different way. That's it, folks. Far out or what? You like this kind of stuff? Okay, so if you have any thoughts or questions on that, you can send them to our Facebook, my one, or Mantra Night, or Meditation New Zealand. Whether it's a question or even you want to hear a little bit more about any of these things, then do let us know. We're very willing. I mean, the reality is, most of the stuff that we deal here on Mantra Night is pretty basic, but really important and really powerful. This knowledge that you are not the material body, that you are an eternal spiritual being, and the practice of mantra meditation as a means to realize that reality can so much transform your life. You can actually become free from all anxiety, all fear, and it can begin to awaken a whole another spiritual experience. But in many ways, that is only the beginning. But it's usually what we deal with here, because it's universally acceptable. People can, manage that and they like that and everything. But there is much more. Okay, so let us do some of this chanting. So that we may become transformed. I'm going to sing Gopala Govindarama mantra. Gopala Govindarama Madana Mohana Gopala Govindarama Madana Mohana Gopala Govindarama Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Haribol.